Autistics and ADHDers are sometimes accused of being too rigid, but it turns out there are perfectly legitimate reasons for us behaving this way. Hi, I'm Essie. I'm an autistic and ADHD therapist. Today, I am talking to you about cognitive rigidity in neurodivergent folks, some of the reasons for it, and also some alternate approaches to increase our flexibility as neurodivergent individuals. Now, cognitive rigidity is a term that refers to a lack of flexibility in thinking, in one's approach to routines, in one's expectations around things going a certain way. Cognitive rigidity can show up in autistic and ADHD individuals in the form of wanting to adhere to a specific routine or having difficulty in taking others' perspectives. And it's believed to be a byproduct of our unique neurocognitive profiles. I believe this rigidity functions as a protective mechanism. It ensures that things are predictable, that there is more certainty than uncertainty, and therefore we're more prepared and able to cope with the various stressors we face as neurodivergents. For example, I can be really rigid about the places I'm willing to go. I have difficulty sitting in a movie theater for an hour and a half to 2 hours at a spell. I want to get up and do other activities or maybe multitask to keep myself stimulated. I want to get up sometimes, I want to multitask, and you can't really do that easily in a movie theater without inconveniencing others. I also have sensory sensitivities, so sitting in a movie theater and hearing people crunch on popcorn, rustle bags, breathe through their noses, these things can get really irritating very fast. And I find sometimes I end up plugging one ear with a thumb or putting an earplug or 2 earplugs in to cut down the sensory input. Otherwise, it's a very torturous experience. My rigidity shows up as a lack of willingness to go to the movie theater. I will do it if somebody really wants me to, but I tend to avoid this environment because I know what my tolerance levels are like, and I know that I'm more likely than not to get irritated or to not enjoy the experience. I might be rigid, for example, about the kinds of cuisines I'm willing to eat or the meals I'm willing to eat because I have dietary requirements. And I know if I eat certain cuisines or dishes, I'm likely to eat ingredients that are going to make me sick. So I tend to be very rigid about where I'm going to eat because it's practical. It's not necessarily me being rigid for rigidity's sake. It's me trying to micromanage my various needs as a neurodivergent individual with co-occurring health conditions. Where rigidity can get me into trouble is where I, for example, have an idea about the way something should be, and someone comes along and says, actually, what about if we do it this way? And I want to stay with what's familiar, and I want to refuse that alternate option and not even consider it because the very premise of considering it causes me anxiety. It doesn't happen on a conscious level, but as soon as an uncertain situation is introduced to the equation, I start thinking about all the dangerous what ifs, like what if this thing happens, or what if this problem arises? And no, I need to stay within this box because if I don't, something terrible will happen. And that kind of catastrophizing and avoidance can be quite limiting because I start closing myself off prematurely to other options, other ideas, and the balance of my life as a result tend to get even more narrow as time goes by. This is the downside of avoidance of certain situations. It tends to make anxiety grow and not go. One of the other factors that contributes to rigidity I've already mentioned, which is sensory sensitivities. Neurodivergents tend to get overloaded quite easily in terms of sensory needs, executive demands, and social interactions. I refer to this as the SES bandwidths. And these bandwidths tend to get saturated a lot more easily than with our neurotypical counterparts because of our unique neurocognitive profiles. We might refuse, for example, to do certain tasks because we know we're going to get overwhelmed with it and then get very anxious. We might refuse to go to certain social situations because we know that all 3 bandwidths are likely to get saturated. We can get overloaded from background noise, from being around crowds. We can get overloaded with the task of remembering names when we're meeting new people and following social conversations and saying the right thing at the right time. And then there's the whole social perception side of things where we're trying to read people and anticipate what they want from us in the interaction and trying to meet those expectations. And this can lead very easily to overload. And if we're not quick to address this, overload leads to shutdown, leads to meltdowns, which are like temper tantrums, or, we might scream, we might cry, we might have a huge disproportionate emotional response. And if this continues over time, we might reach a state of burnout. Recovery can take days, weeks, and even months for some people. Rigidity in this case is protective because we're avoiding situations that we know can cause us a lot of heartache and turmoil. Rigidity can also be a response to living in a structurally ableist society where we're oppressed and we're constantly exposed to various stressors, also known as minority stress, that are related to our minority status as a neurodivergent. We know that if we go to certain environments, we're going to be exposed to sights, sounds, smells, sensory input that is going to overload us. I know, for example, that if I go to a public area that's frequented by lots of people and there's live music or there's bustling crowds, I'm going to get overwhelmed very fast and will want to retreat. I also know that I have to be willing to go into these environments sometimes and be able to spend a little bit of time there to expose myself and to get acclimatized to it. I'm just going to have to be conscious of the fact that I will hit my limit a lot faster than most people and that I need to take certain actions afterward to recover. Now, the fact these environments are sensorially overwhelming is not an accident. These environments are often designed with neurotypical needs in mind. And this is where it comes back to ableism, because in ableist societies, the world is designed according to the needs of the majority, the neurotypical majority, rather than the specifications of different neurotypes, which will differ. Another way this rigidity can manifest is when neurodivergents avoid social interactions full stop, because they're afraid of being judged, criticized, shamed, mocked, or excluded because of their neurodivergent traits. In ableist societies, neurocentrism is the norm. And by neurocentrism, I mean that neurotypical perspectives and needs are centered, and that neurodivergent needs and perspectives are not given any kind of priority. This power imbalance puts neurotypicals in an elevated position while relegating neurodivergents to a lower status. Their needs, their wants, their desires and preferences are not given any kind of accommodation, and they're seen to be insignificant or unimportant to the majority. This is very much the case with social norms, with neurotypicals expecting that neurodivergents will conform to their own norms regardless of the neurodivergent's neurocognitive profile and their differing preferences with social communication, for example, or difficulties with mind reading or understanding the perspectives of other neurotypes. For example, neurotypicals will always expect neurodivergents to conform to their social norms and behaviors. And as soon as we go outside of those social norms and behaviors, we are targeted or criticized, or we're told that we're being rude or insensitive, or we're judged as being a cruel person, a person who's selfish, who doesn't consider other people's needs. And as a result, we're more likely to be rigid about not entering social situations where there's too much uncertainty, or there are interactions with people we don't know, because we don't know if they're necessarily going to extend us the benefit of the doubt and treat us with compassion if we make these social mistakes according to neurotypical norms. The only other alternative for many neurodivergents to avoiding is to overcompensate, to engage in people-pleasing, to mask, camouflage, and compensate for their neurodivergent traits to the exclusion of their authentic selves. And for many neurodivergents, this is a compromise they aren't willing to make, rightfully so, because you wouldn't go to a neurotypical and say to them, sorry, the way you are is broken or dysfunctional. You need to change to meet everybody's expectations. This is not to say that all people should subscribe to some social norms, because this is really important as part of social cohesion and for society and communities to function well. The point I'm trying to make is that neurodivergent rigidity in these situations is a response to what is perceived to be a global attack upon neurodivergent identities. The fear of social rejection and failure can lead many people to adopt defensive or defeatist attitudes in which the neurodivergent withdraws completely, becomes resentful, retaliates against neurotypicals and neurotypical society in some way. The fear of being treated as inadequate can lead them to become counterdependent, meaning they're less likely to want to rely on others or to turn to others for help, and to engage in self-isolation and rigid adherence to structures, routines, norms that keep them safe, but can result in lowered participation in many life activities or social engagement. Rigidity, as I mentioned, can be protective. It can provide temporary relief. It can subtract uncertainty and give the neurodivergents a sense of safety. But it can also be maladaptive when it prevents us from living the life to which we're entitled. To me, this life is one in which we feel accepted by others, we're socially connected, we're enjoying all aspects of life that we might otherwise avoid, and we're less likely to want to do these things if we're not feeling safe. The antidote to rigidity, as I see it, is gradual introduction to the source of stress or uncertainty so we can build a tolerance to it. I'm not suggesting we jump in and we immerse ourselves entirely in situations that are going to overwhelm us, but gradual exposure until we know what our limit is if we don't already, and we work within the bounds of this limit and we don't exceed it. For me, that might involve going to a social situation for an hour or two, and then when my social battery has run low, I will excuse myself and go home and do something to restore my energy levels. I'll also challenge myself to go to a new restaurant, try a new cuisine, try a new dish as an experiment, knowing that there might be negative consequences, but being willing to take that chance so I can have a new experience. Practicing mindfulness and checking myself when I notice that I'm getting stuck in these rigid patterns of thinking and behaving, and offering alternatives, suggesting I try alternate patterns of thinking or behaviors or take other perspectives, or encouraging myself to be flexible about accommodating others and their perspectives and needs can go a long way to getting me out of this mental gridlock. If we see rigidity as a response to ableism and the shame that comes out of internalized ableism, the recourse that's open to us is practicing self-compassion, looking at ourselves with greater kindness rather than criticism. Acknowledging that we have a different neurotype and therefore different needs, and that it's okay that these needs diverge from those of neurotypicals. It's really important that you check yourself when you're catastrophizing and fortune telling about something terrible happening down the line if you go outside of this narrow road or path that you're walking, if you try something different or you expose yourself to a new experience. Reminding yourself to be open-minded about the experience and what can come of it, rather than always anticipating a negative outcome. Planning and preparing in advance of these experiences that could be stress-inducing is also key. When I go into environments or situations that are likely to overload me sensorially, it's helpful for me to have a set of earplugs, sunglasses, any kind of sensory aid at hand that can mitigate the negative effects. Catching yourself when you notice that your rigidity is leading to counterdependence, to this belief that you can't rely on or trust other people, and pushing back against that very gently. This might take the form of finding other people with common interests or who understand your neurodivergent experiences and seeking company, solidarity, and understanding through their presence. I think we all benefit from pushing back against neurocentrism, the belief that the neurotypical experience should be centered, and advocating for more inclusive practices, explaining to people why you might be rigid about something and the needs that you're trying to meet or the problems you're trying to avoid, so they can try to take our perspectives and start to consider that their norm isn't everybody's norm. Open communication can really help. When I'm about to enter a situation that might lead to rigidity, I try to have a dialogue with the people I'm with to explain to them my needs and why I might be behaving a certain way and what I might need to navigate the situation more effectively. If, for example, I'm out and about with friends and I'm getting overloaded, I might explain to them that I'm going to put a pair of earplugs in, not because I don't want to hear them, but because I want to cut down the sensory input that is overloading me, and that I can still hear them through the earplugs, and that I'm not trying to disrespect them. I'm just trying to meet my own needs. Expressing your emotions directly, using I statements to explain yourself can also be very productive. When we can communicate directly, we don't have to hide these things. We don't have to feel ashamed of them. There's less likely to be a misunderstanding because you've explained yourself and you've given the other person a chance to take your perspective. Whether the person chooses to respond with empathy and compassion is ultimately their choice, but you can't be faulted for self-advocating. Freedom for neurodivergence comes through self-acceptance and authenticity, and we can work our way towards these things by speaking up, by giving other people the chance to hear us and accept us. Yes, it comes with the possibility of a lack of understanding or somebody judging or rejecting us. But if they're going to do that, they're going to do that, regardless of whether we show up authentically or not. We show up authentically because the alternative is masking, camouflaging, and compensating, and this just leads to more stress and to imposter syndrome. Little by little, as we learn to better accommodate our own needs and to advocate for those needs, we're less likely to rely on rigidity and more likely to adopt more flexible approaches. And flexibility is key for us as neurodivergents surviving in an ableist world. Yes, the world needs to learn how to better accommodate a variety of neurotypes, and we can also learn how to flex on certain expectations so we can still meet our needs, but approach things with greater openness. In my experience, I've found that neurotypicals are a lot more likely to be understanding and less likely to pass a judgment if I have an open dialogue about my needs rather than resorting to rigidity as a defense. I feel less ashamed of myself and my needs as a result, and I start to develop greater acceptance around my neurodivergence. I go from thinking, I should be this way, I shouldn't be this difficult, I should be more open-minded, I should try to explore this opportunity rather than shutting down immediately. And I go to, well, there are logistical considerations that I have to navigate, and if I can be upfront about them, and if I can be open-minded about trying alternatives, then maybe I can navigate the situation more effectively and experience things that I might not otherwise do because I've shut down. What have your experiences with cognitive rigidity been like? Where have you gotten stuck? Where are you kind of adhering too rigidly to certain routines or structures or expectations? How is it serving you and how is it not serving you? If you faced challenges with rigidity, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it, subscribing to my channel, and sharing it with anyone you think might benefit from my content. These gestures go a long way to helping other people like yourself find and access this content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.